Hello YouTube, Tugwed here from Coding Geeks, and today we will be learning about vectors in C++. I will be guiding you through what they are and also a few examples of how they can be used. Also, I will be just scratching the surface of vectors in C++ and teaching about the more frequently used functions and methods. I will be putting some links in the description if you want to go in more detail about what all vectors can do. Also, before starting, make sure you include the vector and the algorithm libraries along with IOStream for our examples to work. Also, I'll be using Visual Studio on Windows for our examples, but you can get away with any compiler or IDE which supports C++ 2011 or higher. So starting off, vectors in C++ are a dynamic array data type which are part of the extensive C++ standard template library or STL. They are basically C++ versions of arrays whose size can be increased and decreased on demand and also have a huge range of functions available to work on them. Starting off with the basic syntax. Vectors are declared using vector and the curly braces. Inside the curly braces, we put the data type of which we want the vector of. It can be int, float, string, anything, even in user-defined classes. In this case, let's put int and name it array. Vectors are just indexed and defined like normal C-style arrays. So this would be valid. And if I have to print the very first element of my vector, I'll do this. And let's execute this. And as you can see, one is our very first element. Also, I can assign to every single element. So if I want to assign this to the third element, then I will assign 10. If I put this here, and if I execute this, this will obviously print 10, right? Now moving on, if I have to print the entire vector, what I will do is use a normal for loop, which I would have used for an array. But in this case, for instead of defining the size ourselves, I will just use the array.size method, which returns the length of my vector, which is a very useful function, obviously. And then just print my ith element. I'll put a space here so that it will be better to read. And yeah, as you can see here, I printed 1, 2, 3, 4, which is the expected output. And now, moving on, if I have to create an empty vector, but I have to define a size for it. For example, if I create a vector of 100 values, let me just keep the loop here. It will be easier for us to print. And if I have 100 values, this will just print zeros. But these can also be garbage values as the value, default value will be 0 is not guaranteed here. So if I want to put a default value here, I will give this constructor a second argument and let's give this 40. And if I give this 40, I'll have 40 in my entire vector array. Now moving on, let's talk about a few methods on vectors. To append a new value to this entire vector, let me just create our own vector, which was 1, 2, 3, 4. Now if I have to append a value to this, like insert a value after 4, what I will do is I will use the inbuilt function array.pushback, which is a vector function. I will just put 5 here and this ideally should print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is does in this case. Sure, yeah, it does. And at the same time, likewise, if I have to remove the last value from my vector, I will just use array.popback without any arguments. So my final array is supposed to be 1, 2, 3. Let's check if it is, and it works. So after this is done, if I have to get the first and last element of my vector, so let me just comment this part out. So if I print array.front, this will print the first element of my vector. See out array.back will print the last element of my vector, likewise. So if I run this, I will have 1 and 4. Also, as C++11 goes, a new type of range-based for loop was introduced, which iterates over all elements of a specific container. So its syntax goes as follows. It will do the same job this loop does, but in a better and more cleaner way. So the syntax goes as follows. Basically, this will be every element inside our array and a colon and then our vector, our container name. So, and I'll put a cout here. So what this basically does is it iterates over all elements of this array and assigns them to element in every single iteration. So we can use this element for everything we want. So if I find this, I will get 1, 2, 3, 4, the same result I got from this loop, but this loop looks very clean. That is why we use this loop when we just want to iterate over all the elements. Obviously, this loop will be used in some cases when we have to do very complex operations, or whenever we have to change the way the counter is incremented or stuff, but that's not in the scope of this tutorial. Now talking about some STL functions, don't forget to include this algorithm header file. Let's start with sort function. Let me create an unsorted vector here. Let's take 5, 4, 2, 3, 1. This should ideally sort. So the sort function goes as follows. Now here I will put array begin and array end. Now, begin and end are two methods which return pointers which point to the memory location of the first element of the vector and the memory location right after the last element of the vector respectively. And the sort function or any STL function which does something with vectors use the end pointer to find out the end of the entire list. So basically, these return pointers, which are also known as iterators, and you can read further about them in the links in the description. And what this function will do is it will sort the array in place. It will edit the entire array and produce a sorted result. So if I was to print this array using our new range based for loop, if I was to execute this, I would get 1, 2, 3, 4, which is a sorted result, right? And sort is a very useful function. This uses the quick sort algorithm for sorting, which is one of the fastest algorithms currently. And also, as a bonus for the curious, if I used a normal C array here, a normal C style array, one, let's put this here. And for obviously for old arrays, we need to use the normal syntax to print them, which would be the size would be 5. I'll have to manually input it. Array I. And here what we can do is instead of using array begin and end, we'll just use array. This is basically a pointer which points to the first element, and array plus 5. Now what array plus 5 does is it increments the pointer 5 times, and what it ends up pointing to is the element right after 1, the memory location right after 1 to be precise. And this will actually sort our little array. As you can see, our array is sorted. Let me put this back. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And yes, sort function also works on normal C cell arrays. But I don't recommend this because if you mess up the array size here, you will probably end up sorting just a part of your array, or worse, go out of our bounds of your program and sort your memory or anything like that. And that would be a very bad day for your program. So for example, if I accidentally put 10 here, what this will do is give me some error. As you can see, debug assertion failed. And yeah, this is some garbage value which was probably on the stack when I executed this. So yeah, avoid you doing this for CRS, just use a vector since we are using C++. So let me just Control Z back to my vector example. Yeah, and likewise, we also have the reverse function which reverses the entire list. So let me get this vector, and it has the same syntax as sort had array dot begin and array dot end. Let me put a semicolon here, and if I print this, this will print exactly the reverse of this entire array. It basically reverses the entire array. This is the print function. And now, if there are any Python programmers watching this, we have a map function in Python which executes a function iteratively on every element of a list. So we have a similar function in C++ STL, which is known as for each. So what this function does basically is it obviously takes the array.begin and array.end, which are the end bounds of the array, or vector precisely. And also at the end, I have to put a function pointer here, which will be executed for every single element of this array. So let me create a short function here, which does not return anything, but it takes, let's call this square, This will print the squares of our individual elements. This will take exactly one element as input since every element will be given as a single argument. And I see out just I into I, which is the square of my independent element. This will basically print out the squares of all my elements. So as you can see here, 5 square 25, 16, 4, 9, and 1. And yes, this is how for each function works. This is basically equivalent to the map function in Python and Java. I need to find out what it means. Then for my final example, we will be looking at all of and any of. These are two functions which basically return true or false. So what all of does is it checks if all of the elements in our array satisfy a particular condition. So if I put array.begin, which are obviously the arguments, and in the end, I will have to put a predicate function. A predicate function is basically a function which returns true or false. So if I just change this to func and change its return value to bool, which is boolean, which returns true or false, and then let me check if all my elements are less than 6. So if I is less than 6, I will return true. This function basically iterates over every single element and runs it through this function here, which I have defined, and checks if it returns true or false. Even if one of the element returns true, the all of will just stop and just return false because it would fail the condition which all of runs for. So if I just put works here, if this works, and the L, and here I will put an else and return false also. So this should ideally work since all my elements are less than 6. And yes, we get the expected output, which is works here. And also, if I wanted to check if this really works, I will just put more than 6. And since no element is more than 6, and it did not put anything in the else block here, this would just print nothing, right? So yes, this works. Similarly, for any of function, this returns true if any of these elements satisfy my function condition, which this returns. So if I was to turn I is more than or equal to 5, this would just return true, or let's just put I equals 5. This would just return true for just one element in my entire array since there is just one 5. And any of would still work because it is any element. And let me execute this. Yes, it works as we expected. And that was it for vectors. I have just scratched the surface. There are many more useful functions out there in the STL for vectors. I would recommend you to check out insert, remove, and find functions for vectors, which use the same iterators we used for sort, reverse, all of, and any of. This was just an introduction. I have put some links in the description for further reading if you wish to see all the vector features you have available at your service. And in conclusion, vectors are a very powerful feature of the C++ standard library, and such powerful containers and functions of the STL give C++ the reputation it has today. And that is about it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, guys. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more content and the YouTube algorithm. This was Rugved from Coding Geeks, and I will see you next time.